Hey everyone, welcome back to The Problem With, where I just spew weird knowledge onto you so that we can talk about what the issues in the world of comic books are. And today, because of the launch of the television show Loki, we're going to talk about the problem with Loki. Now, before you go into the comments down below, I haven't seen it yet. We're filming this like way in advance because we're talking about why Loki doesn't work in the comics. But today's episode is brought to you by That Hot Sauce Is. For those of you who've been on the channel for a while, you know that we launched our own hot sauce brand, a whiskey-infused, jalapeno-based hot sauce that is pretty mild and works on pretty much everything. Obviously, I'm a fan of it, otherwise I wouldn't have created it. And if you want to help us with this new endeavor, please click the link down below or click the link in our YouTube store thing if it ever works, and you can buy it directly. Now, in order to understand the problem with Loki in the comic books, we need to understand why Loki actually even works in the MCU. And you all know that I'm the comic book guy. I'm not the MCU guy. So I invited an MCU expert. How's it going?
Hey, Benny. Hi, guys. Wow, I just have to say, what an incredible intro. This guy flew with no net. There was no, you weren't reading anything.
Nope.
You just said that. I'm like Ron Burgundy. I need like my carefully worded script that I wrote on a prompter. And if I mispronounce something, it sends me into a tailspin for the next 40 minutes. How you just did that, you're a professional, Benny.
It took two takes. I got to admit, there was two takes
But you
in
know
that
what? That first take was flawless. If you had just followed that, you would have been just as good. I have all the respect in the world for you.
Well, I appreciate that. If you guys don't know, this is Eric Voss from New Rockstars, a channel that is much better than mine and much bigger than mine.
A subscriber count is just a number. It's what we call vanity metric. It doesn't matter. Half of them are bots. Who cares? You make great content, Benny. Like, you are the source for comic book wisdom. Don't sell yourself short. You're great.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
But I wanted you to explain to my viewers why Tom Hiddleston and Loki in the MCU has worked for, what is it, like 10 years now he's been doing the role?
Yeah, his first appearance, 2011, Thor. So that would have been 12 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking Loki today.
Yes.
Obviously, Loki in the comics has had kind of a mixed bag of history and success.
Right.
Hasn't always worked, but I think he has been one of the most, if not the most successful thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the way they've adapted these characters over the past 15 years.
I agree. As not being a title character, like being an Avenger, it's surprising how many people know who Loki is and enjoy what Tom Hiddleston does with the role.
Yeah, and if we're asking why the cinematic version of Loki works in the ways that the one on the pages hasn't, really it does come down to two words: Tom Hiddleston. He is the method of the madness, and I use the term method specifically because a lot of people think, oh, they just made a good casting decision, and they often do. Right. Sarah Haley Finn is the unsung hero of Marvel Studios. She has made some brilliant choices when it comes to casting Tony Stark as Robert Downey Jr. I think Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Chris Evans as Captain America, Josh Brolin as Thanos, even Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff, which Elizabeth Olsen was pretty big gamble because
Right.
she was, kid sister of the Olsen twins, but had an amazing...
I still cannot not see her as just an Olsen twin, even though she isn't. She looks too close to them.
She's a little daughter. I mean, there was like an Olsen twins movie that was in New York, and she just had a cameo in a car seat. It said something. Yeah, but she is so good, and I think definitely the most talented of the three. And she just was in I always forget this. Marcy May Marlene, I think was the name of this.
You already have pulled out more actor names and character names than I can do off the top of my head.
Sorry about that clap there, audio engineer. But yes, Marcy May Marlene, I highly recommend watching it because it is a cult movie, and I love a good cult movie. It's but it was like a sleeper hit that came out of the festival circuit, and Elizabeth Olsen just arrived on the scene and is amazing in the film, and that is what got her cast, I believe, as a Scarlet Witch in the MCU, because she's so good in that, and she does such a good job playing like ex-gaslighting, trying to be deprogrammed from a cult thing, and you see that work in WandaVision. You don't really see it in Age of Ultron as much or Infinity War and Endgame as much, but you see it in WandaVision WandaVision. She's so good. Anyway, this is not about her. It's about Loki.
No, but we can make it about her, because how do you feel about her accent changing midway? I just need to know your opinion on that before we can move forward.
Not her fault.
My viewers are used to tangents. We're having one right now.
We're on one right now. Okay, so Age of Ultron, I think she was given that note by Joss Whedon, who was trying to give her a Sokovian ancestry, which was a bit weird. And then in Avengers Infinity War, the Russo brothers are like, we don't care about that. And then no one really questioned it because we had bigger fish to fry in Infinity War, but it made no sense. WandaVision made some fun meta jokes about it, like, what happened to your accent? I have no idea, but I don't put that on Elizabeth Olsen. She's just trying to do her job as an actor.
She's taking the direction given to her.
But the reason I think it's important to talk about this is I think a lot of viewers misunderstand the job of an actor.
Yeah.
And they misunderstand the job of a casting director and the job of a director. I think they expect actors to be perfectly adapting the vision of a comics character that is in their head and to perfectly embody the voice that was in their head when they read the word bubbles in the comic frames. And that is not the job of an actor. The job of an actor is to interpret it and bring their own life experience to a role.
Right.
And to carry out the vision of the director and the vision of the studio. So not every actor has to be transformative. The reason Robert Downey Jr. is great in Iron Man is he is playing a version of himself. Robert Downey Jr. is bringing his own redemptive history to that role. And like even down to the detail of the cheeseburgers that he unwraps during the press conference, that is based off a real life anecdote that Robert Downey Jr. went through when he was trying to get clean. He was driving down the PCH. He was not in a good place in his life. He stopped by a Burger King and he was just so messed up that cheeseburger just grossed him out. So he threw all of his dope in the ocean and then he started over. And my joke is, those poor whales, they cannot get enough of that shit now. But that experience is why he was such a good casting choice for that movie, and he's so good in Iron Man throughout the MCU. It's I think people forget it if you grew up with the MCU, if that first Iron Man came out when you were still a kid. But if you were, a kid born in the 90s or in the 80s, you remember seeing Robert Downey Jr. in the headlines on it wasn't TMZ yet, but these other tabloid shows, Extra and whatever, him going in and out of drug court, and like remember the mugshots of him, and everyone just felt so bad for him because he wasn't a crazy party boy who was like getting DUIs and driving through playgrounds and shit. He was just struggling and he was trying to work through it, and he brought that experience to Iron Man, and just by casting him in that role, like Favreau, Feige, like were able to tap into the public's view of like this person, this human being. Now again, it's a Loki episode. We're supposed to be talking about Loki. I'm sorry about that.
But you are going right to what we need to talk about for Loki, because it's all about the actors and what they bring to the thing. That's why Loki and Captain America and Iron Man and Thor all work, because you have the actor who's doing the role for 10 years.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like putting their version on it. Yeah. Robert Downey Jr. doesn't change his portrayal of Iron Man with every movie.
Right.
Loki doesn't change the way he's doing Loki every movie. And I think that the problem with the Loki in the comics is that's exactly what happens. It also happens with Iron Man. And I think part of the issue is you have the Marvel mandate that they're supposed to look and sound and be the MCU. But you have a different writer who comes in and wants to do their version. Loki has gone from dying all the way back in Ragnarok to becoming Kid Loki, to going on a journey as Kid Loki, to becoming the agent of Asgard, to going to become the president, which I still find to be the weirdest decision to do with Loki.
Yeah.
And I believe there was something else that happened in the middle of all that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. But the point I'm making is that there's been so many different versions of Loki, all trying to act like the previous version so you can have some kind of consistency. But at the same time, they're not. Right. Every writer comes in and tells his spin on the story. Marvel doesn't let us get Loki issue 100. Marvel lets us get Loki issue 12 and then cancels it and moves on to another Loki. We have the same issue with Iron Man right now, where Chris Cantwell came in and did a great run with the entire thing, and he went like 30 issues, and then they rebooted Iron Man. And now he's working with the X-Men. And it's just a different writer, different tone, different voice. But it's what you were talking about with the Robert Downey Jr. situation. And so Tom Hiddleston also has a very similar situation as well.
Yeah. What Robert Downey Jr. and what Tom Hiddleston brought to their characters was a relatable humanity that no writer of, well, I don't want to say no writer of comics or screenplays gets. I think writers get humanity on ways actors never can. But specifically that the comic adaptation of Loki, or the comic version of him, did not have up until that point. And that detail was an innate sense of envy that Tom Hiddleston had. I think what people forget, you can go on YouTube and watch his original auditions for the Thor film. Kenneth Branagh brought him in to audition for Thor.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to watch Tom Hiddleston's auditions for Thor. He's good. I would say he would have made a better Thor than Chris Hemsworth. I say this as someone who loves Chris Hemsworth, and I'm so grateful to what he brought as Thor throughout the films. But he took a couple...
I almost feel like Chris Hemsworth got it in the beginning just because of the physique and the hair.
Yes.
And then he grew into Thor. But if
Right.
you will look at that first movie's Thor versus like Thor Ragnarok Thor, he's probably one character that actor that has changed his portrayal over the course of all of his appearances.
Right. My favorite movie of in which he plays Thor was an Endgame. I feel like that's where he got the mix of what Taika Waititi brought to the role of Thor on the page, but also the sense of tragic loss and the weight and that kind of royal drama that Thor does need, and what it means to be a true Asgardian and a Viking. Like that's one thing that like I don't. Maybe Thor Ragnarok, some of the other earlier Thor films tried to go for, but Endgame really hit that. He's like drinking ale, he's gaining weight, he's living in this weird new Asgard colony. But Tom Hiddleston, you watch his auditions, he gained a lot of weight. He really tried to carry that weight of Thor. And the fact that he didn't get that and they cast him as Loki, I thought was a brilliant decision, because Tom Hiddleston went into that with the same Shakespearean training, hoping he would be able to play a Marvel superhero, and instead he's cast as a more interesting role as the villain. Who does feel like a Shakespearean Iago or a Macbeth, who's just a guy trying to seize the throne or the glory for himself. But he has to share the screen with an Aussie surfer bro. And he does such a good job playing opposite that while still being respectful to Chris Hemsworth as an actor, as he always has, but you can see that in his eyes. And if you look at Tom Hiddleston from the 2011 Thor to 2012 Avengers to his next appearance, which I believe Thor the Dark World, and then Ragnarok, and then Infinity War, he looks different in every single title. He looks different from all the titles when he appears in Loki. Joss Whedon put him in this weird pallor makeup, very pale, dark sunken eyes. He looks inhuman in not Marvel Inhuman, but less, monstrous, you could say. And despite that, Tom Hiddleston brings to this role this kind of like, it's not the moments when he speechifies, is this not easier? He's great. He chooses scenery in those roles. It's his reaction after Hulk ragdolls him around and calls him a puny god. That close-up of him crammed into the floor, that is what Tom Hiddleston brings to the role. That is so good. That comic delivery and that sense of pathos.
Yeah. He's so good with the role and being able to embody the exact same character and the exact same like motives and the mannerisms. When Loki starts, we obviously have a different Loki. We killed the original Loki. And you still believe it's just him. Like, he didn't try to reinvent the character's behavior or attitude. We just rolled him back to an earlier stage.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think that Tom Hiddleston brings that we are missing from comic books, is that even rebooting the character in the MCU, it still is him. It's still him doing the exact same way he did Loki before, but now with a different motive, different MO, different goals.
Yeah.
But it all lines up, and we're missing that when you decide to go from kid Loki to, okay, now we have old Loki, now we have woman Loki, but they're all different writers and all different behaviors and all different mannerisms, and Loki doesn't act the same. Loki from Agent of Asgard doesn't vibe with me that he would try to become the president.
Right. No, it's a writer's choice, not a character's choice.
Right, and that's, I think, the problem with Loki in the comics. The writers, they're all making great stories. I don't want to say, oh, they're doing a bad job, but they're each telling their story. And a lot of comic goers don't understand that we don't have one writer. This isn't manga or a 11. It's not like Supernatural 15 season show where you have kind of like the same ideas. When a different writer comes into the same character on Marvel or DC, it just completely changes. Your favorite run is over. This is a new run, and they might reference old stuff, but it's not the same, and it's not what was intended by that original writer. And that's the issue we run into with Loki. We don't have Tom Hiddleston, and we need Tom Hiddleston. We need something like that, somebody to oversee how Loki's supposed to behave. It would technically be an editor's job when it comes to the comic books.
Yeah.
But if you've been reading comics a while, editors have their own mandates, and it kind of conflicts with making everything line up.
Yeah.
How do you? What do you think about the comic book Loki? Because you keep up with comics to a general. I'm not saying you've read every Loki comic, but
I haven't. I haven't. Yeah, I think Loki was just a clearly two-dimensional, brightly colored villain for most of the, as most of the characters were. I think he was just somewhat more interesting than Thanos was. I don't think comic Thanos was all that interesting. It was really just the scale of Thanos that I found more interesting. But as a human being or as a Titan who's trying to woo death, I don't think he's that interesting. And I feel that same way about Loki on the page. Yeah. I don't think Loki became more interesting to me until the Ragnarok event, and then the reincarnation happened. And I thought I kind of like the Kid Loki arc.
I think Kid Loki's probably the best they've done since his death, but now that's like 8 years old.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, respawning as a kid in France. I'm like, ooh, I'm into this. That's one thing that I think the comics so far have done better than the show. I wasn't crazy about Kid Loki in Loki episode 5 in season 1.
I felt that was just an Easter egg cameo.
Yeah.
Same thing with the alligator Loki. It really wasn't that Loki. It was just...
It was just there, and it played the role. The kid who played him was great, but it's just there is a cool Kid Loki arc that I would have loved to have seen. It's just, when you work with child actors, you put a lot of pressure on them to deliver the goods. So I get why they didn't go that. And it wasn't about that. It was about our Loki. I think you're absolutely right. The Loki in the comics doesn't have that core thematic value that great comic book characters have. Captain America, you understand who he is, no matter how they reinvent Steve Rogers over the decades. Spider-Man, or Peter Parker, and then Miles Morales. Even Tony Stark, although Tony Stark has had some issues over the years.
Spider-Man's a great example because Dan Slott wrote Spider-Man for like 15-something years, maybe 20 years, but long enough that you knew what Spider-Man was going to do and his behavior, and it all lined up perfectly. Love or hate Dan Slott's run, it was long enough you could get attached to what is actually happening.
Yeah.
Which is also why I think even though he left like 5 years ago, that he's now writing Spider-Man again.
Right. I think, but the fact that Loki was such of a blank slate in the comics, I think gave Tom Hiddleston more room to fill that in with some kind of Shakespearean subtext. Mm-hmm. And then it gave him more room to define the character in a way that works on screen. He wasn't as bound by some of the trappings of the character that people who have to play Peter Parker feel trapped by when they play them. I mean, it's not just that. Like, Sony also issues rules. Like, Peter Parker must be this. He must be this. He must be this.
I remember when those leaked out.
He can't be gay. He has to be white. All this bullshit. But I think that those values still kind of restrain what Tom Holland is allowed to do as Peter Parker.
Yeah, well, he still has to just be Peter Parker.
Right.
He can put his own flavor on it, but there's not much room for a version. It's just you're going to be Peter Parker.
Right. And how much fun is it when Tom Hiddleston gets to kill people as Loki? Or just gets to kill people in real life? We've talked to him about that. He shouldn't do that anymore, because it's illegal. And
well, that's the biggest reason I'd say.
Yeah. Also, it really something. It makes it hard to sleep at night when you do that kind of thing.
It's not really that bad, but anyway, I think
the rails. Yeah. But like Tom Hiddleston, how much fun does he have when he's playing the version of Loki in Berlin who's stealing the guy's eye? Like that moment in the first Avengers film where it's like he's killed 18 people in the past few days. He's adopted. Like he's just he can get away with that kind of thing. I think the issue though in the comics, they've tried to reinvent Loki in the way that they've reinvented Deadpool. I think in certain extents, like he's just a vessel for whatever we want to do with him. We can make him president. Who cares? Yeah. And Loki isn't that. I think Loki always has to be a certain almost kind of like a Prince Harry figure a little bit. He's not a prince anymore, but Harry from the House of Windsor. I think audiences relate to the younger brother or the half brother or the adopted brother who is not a successor to the throne, but is probably worthier at the end of the day, would have been a better leader, or is just a more relatable human being.
And I think we can all relate to having that annoying younger brother who just keeps pranking you, basically.
Right.
Yeah, he's trying to kill you, but it's all in fun,
And that's how Thor sees him. That's how the Crown sees him. But what I'm saying is, from the perspective of Prince Harry, who's like, I haven't gone through the same kind of upbringing the way the successor has been groomed for the throne. But that lack of upbringing has given me greater perspective and a wider breadth of humanity than the actual worthy successor has. I have more life experience. I have had more freedom. But I've seen more in the world, and I understand human nature to a greater depth than you do, you stuffy monarch. So maybe that would make me a better ruler. And that's what we see in the pages of Shakespeare. Like Macbeth is that. He's a war general, and he lets that kind of envy for the crown get the better of him. He has Lady Macbeth who whispers in his ear as well, but Iago is that type of figure. Like jealousy and envy is one of the 7 deadly sins, and it's such an interesting character trait to explore. And I think that value is core to Loki. If nothing else, from the early pages of Simonson's take on the character, envy has to be there. And if you make Loki president, it's not about envy anymore. It's about ego.
Right.
And like Tom Hiddleston's take on the character, yes, he does play it with a lot of ego, and you see that in the Glorious Purpose episode of Loki season 1, episode 1. But beyond that is like deeper than that. Feeding that ego is envy, a sense of I've never been given what I truly deserve. I'm always grasping at power, and I never fully get it. And that kind of sense of frustration that I think he's jealous of what other people have.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like just coming into what the big thing that Tom Hiddleston brings to it that we just don't get properly in the comics. And President Loki's a great example. Now I do think President Loki just came out as a spoof goofy.
Right. I don't think they were trying to identify anything as like this is a canon part, a life event for him. It was meant to be kind of just like.
But the problem with doing a story like that for a character like Loki, it's not like they had a normal concurrent Loki storyline going alongside it, so we could just have this goofy one on the side. That becomes a pivotal part in his history. Remember that time Loki ran for president? Like, what?
Yeah. And that's kind of the hard thing when you have new writers come in is they take stories that were not meant to have legacy holding weight and they turn them into these pivotal events. Sometimes that can be a great thing, but other times it's like that I don't think was needed to be a core part of Loki's life journey. And that's what I really loved about the Loki series on Disney Plus is, the trailer had a lot of President Loki in it, and we thought it was going to be a big part of it, and that was a bit of a concern that I had going into that series.
I thought it was going to be President Loki plot.
And instead they pushed that to the Void episode, and he really is just on screen for like 5 minutes, and then he gets both of his hands bitten off by an alligator, and that's it. And he's done. And they deal with him as much as we need.
Yeah. But I think, thank you for being here, Eric. I think we've pretty much hit the nail on the head. We got the problem with here and what my issue with it, and you at least agree on camera, and I'm going to hold you to that. So, guys, don't forget to check out New Rockstars. If you haven't heard about them, then you don't follow MCU stuff. But you know what? Make sure you check out New Rockstars. Eric's there all the time.
Yeah, and Benny's actually there. I believe when this video is up, if you go over to the New Rockstars channel right now, you can see Benny and me talking about the character of Victor Timely in this season of Loki. And what they're doing differently with Victor Timely and what issues of we didn't really touch on Kang in this episode, but
it's not a Kang episode.
It's not a Kang episode. We'll do a Kang episode in the future, but
I'll come back. We'll do a Kang episode. It'd be
because
great. Because I have so many complaints. He made me read 700 pages of 1970s Marvel comics to prep for Kang. And it did not make Kang better for me.
We have a lot of problems with Kang.
I don't like Kang anymore.
Kang
all right,
is not that.
Do not read 1970s Kang. I'm just telling you right now.
There's like one or two good Kang runs, I think.
I don't care what other comic YouTubers are telling you. The essential reading. It's not.
It's not.
Don't read it.
Don't. Agreed. Cosign 100%.
But don't forget to check out my new hot sauce we just came out with. This hot sauce is Hatch and Jalapeno, whiskey infused jalapeno based hot sauce. We're having a great run with it. We're really enjoying it. And if you want to get a part of this initial batch before we come out with the hot one, click the link down below. We really appreciate your support. But that's it. I'll come back next week and complain about something else that you guys are going to yell at me as just a nitpick. But when you yell at me that we're just nitpicking, I think you missed the point of the show.
That's the point.
That's the point. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Benny.
Thanks.